Stop what you're doing for the next 20 minutes and pay close attention, because what happened to Ukraine between the morning of May 13th and the night of May 14th, 2026, is not what most coverage is going to tell you it was. They will call it an attack, a large one. They will count the casualties, they will note the buildings, and then they will move on. And in moving on, they will miss the single most important thing about this war. In a window of just 30 hours, Russia launched more than 1,600 drones and missiles at Ukrainian territory. That is roughly one weapon every 67 seconds, around the clock, for a day and a quarter. The overnight wave alone, 675 Shahed-type drones, 35 cruise missiles, 18 Iskander ballistic missiles, and 3 Kinjal hypersonic missiles, set a record for the largest two-day aerial barrage of the entire war. What I see in those numbers is not a battle. It is the signature of an entirely different kind of war than the one being reported. This is not a battlefield war anymore. This is an industrial extermination war, a campaign designed not to break an army, but to systematically exhaust a society's capacity to defend itself, to sustain itself, and to rebuild itself until something collapses that no front line can rescue. And what scares serious analysts is not just what Russia did over those 30 hours, it is what those 30 hours quietly revealed about what is being prepared next. And not only for Ukraine. The framework I want you to use to read this war is one that military planners have a clean name for: exhaustion doctrine. The deliberate substitution of mass for precision. The deliberate substitution of factories for soldiers. The deliberate decision that defense, not offense, is the side you will bankrupt first. Russia is not trying to break through Ukrainian lines. It is trying to make Ukrainian defense unaffordable, week after week, until the cost of staying upright exceeds the cost of falling. The anchor number I want you to hold on to in this entire story is this: 2,700. That is the number of Shahed-type attack drones Russia is now producing every single month, according to a September 2025 assessment by Ukraine's main intelligence directorate. 2,700 per month, at a reported unit cost between $48,000 and $80,000 each. A single Patriot interceptor missile, which Ukraine has been using to shoot some of these down, costs roughly $4 million. One side is producing weapons by the warehouse. The other is firing back with the cost of luxury homes per round. That asymmetry is not a footnote. It is the entire architecture of this war. And once you see it, the surface story stops making sense. To understand how Russia arrived at the capacity to launch 1,600 weapons in 30 hours, you have to look at one place, a vast industrial complex in Tatarstan called the Alabuga Special Economic Zone. 3 years ago, the facility there was assembling roughly 7 Iranian-designed drones per workday from imported kits. By the spring of 2025, according to Ukrainian intelligence cited in CNN reporting, Alabuga was producing around 170 drones per day under its own roof. The Alabuga drone factory, by July 2025, had assembly numbers in the 30,000s stamped onto downed wreckage recovered inside Ukraine. That is not an upgrade. That is the transformation of a country's economy in real time. And the question that should be sitting in your mind right now is, who built that? And more uncomfortably, who is studying it? Because here is the part most coverage will not say out loud. And the reason they will not say it is exactly the reason you need to hear it. The model that built Alabuga is being watched, blueprinted, and quietly contracted out in capitals you would not expect, right now. Stay with me carefully on this one. The next 4 minutes change the entire picture. The strangest thing about the Alabuga story is that the Russians themselves did not invent it. They licensed the design from Iran in early 2023 in a $1.75 billion franchise deal to produce 6,000 Shahed 136 attack drones inside Russia. That figure was meant to be a stretch goal for September 2025. According to the Institute for Science and International Security, Alabuga hit that 6,000 target by mid-August 2024, more than a year ahead of schedule. By the first half of 2025, Ukrainian Defense Intelligence estimated Russia had produced another 18,000 of them. By July of that year, downed wreckage carried a serial number indicating the 30,000th unit had rolled off the line. What you are watching is a country that, 3 years into a war it once expected to be over in 3 weeks, has industrialized one of its strategic weapon systems from near zero to mass production faster than almost any Western defense program in living memory. And it has done so under sanctions. The historical parallel that comes closest is the Second World War. From 1942 through 1944, the United States, Britain, and Germany all underwent something economic historians call industrial mobilization, the conversion of civilian factories into war production at a national scale. The defining feature of that period was not technological brilliance, it was throughput. Whoever could produce the most planes, the most tanks, the most shells, won. The doctrine that emerged from that era, the targeting of industrial and civilian capacity to break a nation's ability to continue, was called air war by attrition. The British official historian Charles Webster put it precisely: the strangling of an enemy not at the front, but at the source. That is not a comforting framing. That is the correct framing. There is one detail that makes the Alabuga story different from every Second World War precedent, and it is the one Western governments are now studying with real concern: the cost. A single Garand 2 drone, according to multiple open-source assessments cited by the Institute for Science and International Security through 2025, costs roughly $50,000 to produce. A Patriot interceptor, again, $4 million. A Tomahawk cruise missile, $1.5 million and up. The drone is roughly 1/80th the cost of the interceptor sent to take it down. That is not a weapons race. That is a math problem, and the math is rigged against the defender. This is the equation Russia has built its strategy around. And it is also the equation that explains why what happened on May 13th and 14 was not an outlier. It was a demonstration of what the system can now do, because the genuinely disturbing fact about that 30-hour barrage is not the 1/600 figure. It is what serious analysts believe is coming after it. Last summer, German General Major Christian Freuding, who heads Germany's Ukraine Support Task Force, gave an interview that received almost no attention in Western media. In it, he warned that based on Russia's industrial trajectory, Moscow is working toward the capability to launch 2,000 drones in a single night, not over 30 hours. In one night. Take a moment to sit with that. The May 13th to 14 attack, which set a war-long record, would, under that scenario, become a routine Tuesday. And here is where your wallet, if you live anywhere in Europe, anywhere in North America, anywhere with a defense budget that has to be approved by voters, quietly enters this story. Because the cost asymmetry equation does not stop at Ukraine's border. It is being studied right now in every NATO defense ministry. Western air defense was designed in a different era, built around shooting down small numbers of expensive missiles or aircraft. It was never economically designed to absorb thousands of cheap one-way attack drones per night. The implication is this: every air defense system in the world, the Patriots that protect United States military bases, the Iron Domes that protect Israeli cities, the Aster missiles that protect European capitals, is now sitting inside an economic structure that was never built for the kind of war Russia has industrialized. And that fact does not stay inside the Ukraine conflict. It changes the global defense calculation for every government watching this, quietly and without press conferences. The second mechanism most coverage does not connect involves what Russia has been doing during the so-called peace pauses, and the data is unambiguous. After the May 9th to 11 ceasefire that the United States president had publicly asked both sides to honor, Russia launched its largest aerial barrage of the entire war within 48 hours. President Zelensky said publicly, in a statement reported by CNN on May 15, 2026, that Russia had stockpiled drones and missiles over a period of time and deliberately timed the strike to ensure its scale was significant. That is not a violation of a ceasefire. That is the use of a ceasefire as a stockpiling window. Read that again, slowly. Once you understand that, the entire diplomatic theater around this war reads differently. Every pause is a production run. Every announcement of negotiation is a logistics opportunity. The framework you have to apply is not war and peace as alternating states. It is one continuous industrial campaign with public relations intermissions. The third layer, most analysts will not say plainly, involves how Alabuga is being staffed. According to investigative reporting from the Wall Street Journal and the Associated Press through 2025, more than 1,000 young women across multiple African countries were recruited under false pretenses, promised hospitality work or scholarships, and routed instead to drone assembly lines in Tatarstan. South African authorities opened a formal investigation in November 2025. Internal documents leaked from the facility also confirmed the employment of Russian students as young as 14 and 15 years old. Russia's own labor minister Anton Kochetkov has told President Putin that the country faces a shortage of 11 million workers by 2030. So this is what you are looking at: a war machine that cannot replace the workers it is sending to the front. A factory model that fills the gap with foreign women lured under false promises and domestic teenagers pulled out of secondary school. A weapon system that costs a fraction of what its target can afford to intercept. And a doctrine that treats every diplomatic pause as a manufacturing window. That is not a war in the classical sense. That is a system. And systems behave in ways individual events do not. Which brings us to the part of this story that should genuinely change how you think about all of it. Take a deep breath before this next section, because what I am about to walk you through is the scenario that strategic planners in 3 different capitals are quietly building contingency plans for, and the reason they will not say it on television is the reason it matters most. The scenario that worries serious people is not whether Russia continues to escalate inside Ukraine. That is now considered a settled question by most analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Royal United Services Institute, and the Institute for the Study of War. The unsettled question is how the Russian model gets exported. There are 3 converging facts here that you should hold in your mind at once. First, the Garan 2 drone, in its newer Garan 3 and Garan 5 variants observed in 2025 and early 2026, has effectively been weaned off Iranian dependence. The Zvezda documentary aired in mid-2025 showed Alabuga producing its own engine clones, its own composite airframes, and its own electronics. Russia no longer needs Iran for the supply chain. It just needs the design lineage. Second, the global market for low-cost, long-range, one-way attack drones did not exist 5 years ago. It does now. Analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies have noted, in reporting cited by major Western outlets, that the Shahed family demonstrates a production model, cheap industrial mass at extended range, that is, in their words, exportable. David Albright, head of the Institute for Science and International Security, told CNN in early 2026 that Alabuga's expansion trajectory points toward production for global export, not just for domestic use. Third, and this is the connection most coverage will never make, every country that has watched the past 3 years of this war has now seen the same demonstration, that a determined power with a domestic drone industry can hold an entire neighboring country's civilian infrastructure at risk for a fraction of the cost the defender pays to absorb it. That is a lesson. And lessons in geopolitics do not stay learned by only one side. Before going further, something deserves a full stop. The United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission for Ukraine has documented more than 15,000 Ukrainian civilians killed since February 2022, with thousands more wounded and millions displaced. The 1,600 weapons launched between May 13th and 14th, 2026, killed at least 22 people, including children, and injured more than 100 others, according to reporting by the Associated Press, NPR, and CNN. Those numbers are not abstractions. They are families, apartment buildings, neighborhoods, parents who got texts that never arrived. They sit behind every strategic analysis, every production figure, every doctrine name. The cost of this kind of war is paid by people who never voted for it and never produced it. That moral seriousness matters because it is what most policy analysis quietly edits out, and it is what the rest of this picture is built on top of. Here is the gap narrative you have to hold on to. The official line from major Western capitals throughout 2025 and into 2026 has been that the war is moving toward a negotiated resolution. The observable reality is that Russia produced more drones in the first half of 2025 than in all of 2024. The observable reality is that the largest single barrage of the entire war happened in May 2026, immediately after a publicly endorsed ceasefire. The observable reality is that Alabuga is hiring, not laying off. That gap between announced peace and visible industrial mobilization is not a communications problem. It is the structural signature of a war that is being prepared for continuation, not closure. The probability, according to most independent strategic assessments published through late 2025 and into 2026, is somewhere between 50 and 60% that this conflict either continues at this intensity through 2027 or escalates further before a meaningful settlement is reached. That figure has not been going down. It has been quietly creeping upward with every quarter Alabuga's production figures are revised. What history tells us about exhaustion campaigns is uncomfortable to spell out. Every student of strategic air history knows the same pattern. The side that gets exhausted first is rarely the side everyone expected at the start, and the exhaustion is almost never visible in the final 90 days before it becomes total. Step back from the specifics for a moment, because all of this, Alabuga, the 30 hours, the ceasefire stockpile pattern, the export potential, adds up to something that touches the country you are sitting in. Here is how, in practical terms. What I want you to take from this is not fear. Fear is not useful. Panic does not help anyone in Kiev, and it does not prepare you for the world this war is producing. What is useful is the map, and the map this conflict is drawing is one that will outlast the war itself. Now, I want to give the counter-argument a fair hearing, because thoughtful analysts at serious institutions look at everything just described and arrive somewhere considerably calmer. They will tell you that Russia, despite its industrial mobilization, has suffered staggering personnel losses, that its long-term economic trajectory is grim, that its workforce is collapsing, and that mass-producing cheap drones is not the same as winning a war. They will note that Ukraine has also industrialized, that Ukrainian drone production grew several-fold over the same period, that Western nations are now standing up their own one-way drone production lines, and that adaptation almost always follows asymmetry. Those points are not wrong. They are part of the honest picture. The honest picture, stripped of both the alarmism and the complacency, is this. Russia has demonstrated a production model that fundamentally changes the cost equation of modern warfare. That model is not going to disappear when this war ends. It is going to be studied, replicated, and refined by every government with the industrial capacity to do it. Ukraine is adapting in real time. The West is adapting too, but slowly. And the period between now and full adaptation, whether that takes 1 year or 5, is the period in which the asymmetry favors the attacker. If you want to track which direction this resolves, here are 3 specific things to watch. Watch the monthly production figures coming out of Alabuga. When they cross the 4,000 per month mark that Ukrainian intelligence has projected, the strategic picture changes again. Watch what NATO defense ministries announce about domestic one-way attack drone production lines through late 2026 and into 2027. That is where the West's structural response either materializes or does not. And watch whether any country outside Russia, particularly in the Gulf, in South Asia, or in Latin America, begins openly licensing or building Shahed derivative production. The first country that does will be the signal that the model has gone global. Because the deeper truth in all of this, the one I want to leave you with, is that wars do not end when the shooting stops. They end when the structures and habits and industries they produced get absorbed into the world that comes after. The Cold War ended in 1991. The military-industrial complex it created is still running. The Second World War ended in 1945. The bomber doctrine it created shaped strategic planning for the next 6 decades. This war in Ukraine is producing a doctrine, exhaustion through industrial mass. And that doctrine will outlive every politician currently negotiating its end. The job is not to be afraid of that. The job is to see it clearly, to understand that the news cycle is going to keep describing this as a series of attacks, while what is actually happening underneath is the quiet construction of a new template for how powerful states pressure weaker ones in the 21st century. To understand that every ceasefire announcement should be read alongside production data. To understand that the cost asymmetry problem is a defense planning problem for every country with a coastline, a border, or a capital. The world that comes after this war will not look like the world that came before it. The technologies that won, the labor models that scaled, the doctrines that proved viable, those will move outward. They always do. The question for everyone watching is not whether the model spreads, it is whether the people watching it see it for what it is before it arrives at their doorstep. History gives us the map, and the map says we have been here before. Only the tools have changed.